Okay, welcome to today's edition. And my name, as you know, is Colleen Markham, and I have with me Suzanne Ducharme. Welcome, Suzanne.
Hi, Colleen. Thanks for having me today.
Awesome. So, Suzanne is a speech and language pathologist, and you are the founder of the offices of Suzanne Ducharme, and that's now out of Norwell.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. So, just to jump right in, what is it that inspired you to get into this line of work?
Well, I would say the happy synchronicities, because I didn't know what I wanted to do when I went to college. And I had this advisor who loved to do like personality tests and aptitude tests, all different kinds of things. And every time I took one of these tests, speech pathology came up. And the only thing I knew about it was that there used to be a character on General Hospital way back in the late 70s, early 80s. There used to be a character who was a speech pathologist, and she carried around a tape recorder, and they hardly ever showed her like doing her work. But when I started looking into what the profession was, I was hooked. Instantly, I was hooked. So I wound up having to change colleges, and I went to UMass Amherst and majored in communication disorders, which is both speech pathology and audiology. So that's the hearing side, hearing aids and hearing testing, things like that. And then I did my graduate work at Emerson in Boston and thought I was going to work with adults. And when I finished my graduate program and was interviewing, I was doing all interviews for adult-based jobs, working in long-term care facilities and hospitals and things like that. And I got a phone call from a pediatric clinic in Braintree and wound up making a quick switch. And I did my residency with pediatrics and never looked back. So it's been sort of this weird, unorthodox way of my getting where I've gone, different places. And then, within my career, I just started my 25th year in practice. And
Wow.
I've worked in a lot of different kinds of settings, and I've had this very interesting evolution of my practice too. So it was just sort of a happy accident.
Wow. Tell us more about your journey that's been a little different.
So as I said, I started out, when you get your master's degree in speech, you have to do a residency, pass a national exam. There's a lot of steps you have to take to become licensed in the state and certified by our national body. And so I did my residency at this outpatient clinic that was, at the time, was a really large clinic. When I started, there were 17 speech pathologists and 2 assistants, plus occupational and physical therapists as well. And I was there for 7 years, which was a really long time for that clinic. And in that time, I learned so much about so many different kinds of kids and different kinds of disorders and all different sorts of things. And I always knew that I wanted to do private practice, but I tried, I worked my way up the management ladder and became the senior speech pathologist and really hated that. I hated it. I didn't like the being caught between the staff that you're supposed to support and nurture and the demands coming from the corporate side, the management, upper management. And so I left there in 2001 and went over to South Shore Hospital, and I worked in the NICU and did some outpatient for them. And then I just decided at some point in 2001, that's it. I am going to go out on my own. And I started half-time, just like without any clients, without anything. Just started putting my name out there, made a business card, and started getting a few clients, got connected with early intervention in Weymouth, which continues to be 17 years later, a referral source for me. I work a lot with the birth to 3 population. And then in 2002, I decided I didn't want to do home care anymore. Like initially I was traveling to people's homes, which is great for families, but it's really tough to sort of put down clinical roots and really get where I wanted to go. So I rented my first office in 2002. So I was in a couple different places in Weymouth over 16 years, and then last year moved to Norwell. And it's been such a great change for me. My space is bigger and brighter, and it gives me lots of room to grow and spaces within this place for me to do all the different kinds of things that I do, because I do a lot more than just traditional speech pathology.
Well, that's perfect segue, because now for those of us, so I have a little bit of an education background, but I think a lot of parents, a lot of people don't even really understand what it is that a speech pathologist does. And especially when you're talking about the birth to 3, you know, I really would love to hear more about what you can do for them. But just in general, could you tell us a little bit more?
Sure. So speech pathologists actually work cradle to grave. We can work with, you know, premature infants in the NICU all the way up until end of life care. But for me, in my practice, I focus pretty much exclusively on pediatrics. So in the course of my career, I've worked with kids up to about age 17 or 18, but now my caseload is really more condensed to the under 10 population. And as I said, I do a lot of work with early intervention, which is birth to 3. And so I work in a couple of different primary areas. I work with kids who have difficulty getting their communication skills going. So what used to be called like a late talker. Doesn't necessarily have a medical background or medical issue, but just can't seem to get going with communication, starting to get words out, putting words together, lots of frustration behaviors, things like that. I also work with kids who have speech issues where they have trouble articulating their sounds. And I think a lot of times that's what people perceive we do. We fix lisps, we fix an R, especially in the public schools, when it's really so much bigger and broader than that. And then the other piece of speech pathology that I do is I work a lot with kids who have feeding and swallowing issues. So sometimes I work with kids who have G-tubes, where they're fed through a tube directly into the stomach, kids who have difficulty coordinating their feeding and swallowing, and so it's not safe for them to eat orally, or they're trying to learn how to get better with eating by mouth. So I work with lots of different kinds of things, and my career seems to have focused itself a lot on the medically complex kinds of kids. But I love, love, love working with young kids, those late talkers, those ones who are having trouble getting started, because it gives me the opportunity to bring parents and kids together. Usually what happens with those kids is that they're not connecting. The child is trying to communicate using whatever means they have. The parent often doesn't understand how they're communicating. And when you bring them together, just boom, magic. And it usually happens really quick too. It can happen really fast when there's not a medical issue kind of in the way. Those kids just blossom, and it's really, really fun.
So what are some of the things that you do in your practice? So if you're seeing a client, a child, what are some of the ways that you help them get over these impediments?
Well, there's lots of different techniques that we use, but the biggest thing to think about with kids is that the work of children is play. So I work through play to help them develop whatever the target skill is. So maybe I'm working with a child on requesting. So I'm going to set up scenario after scenario after scenario in the session where they have an opportunity to do that. So we call those communicative temptations. So for example, if they're eating a snack, but it's in a jar with a lid that they can't open, it gives them an opportunity to work on open or help or please, over and over and over again. If we're doing bubbles, I'm going to seal the bubbles every time, and they have to either say blow or more or go or pop or bubble or whatever it is. So I'm going to continually give them opportunities to practice that. If it's a child who's working on a particular speech sound, then we're going to do all kinds of activities, whether it's moving around the space and practicing our sound, whether it's in front of the mirror, getting the tongue to move in the right direction. So part of the process with every child is sort of figuring out where are the gaps, what are the issues that they have, and then what are all the ways that we can work on that.
Wow. So, and it's just the way you talk about it, it's so clear that you're so passionate about what you do.
I love my work. I call it my capital W work. People say, I'm going to work, right? It's like lowercase w. This is my work. This is my life, passion, my purpose. And I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. And it's growing and evolving all the time. And it's really been such an important part of my life.
Wow. And you've written a book.
I did. I actually had an unusual experience. Most people have an idea or they have something they want to write about, and they write it and write it and write it, and then they have to try to get somebody to publish it, or they publish it themselves. Mm-hmm. I was invited to write my book.
Wow.
So, colleague of mine who was writing a book, the publisher asked him to basically be the editor for a series of books on different kinds of issues in childhood, illnesses and challenges in childhood. And they said, we really think we should have a book on speech and language development disorders, what speech pathologists do. And he said, this is the person that you should contact. So they contacted me, which is not the typical way that writing a book and publishing a book happens. And then we worked together, the editor, the publisher, and myself, to develop the outline of the book and the focus of the book. And then I spent 18 months writing the book and editing the book. And then it came out at the end of 2016. So it's basically, the book has two parts. Is this an okay spot to talk a little bit about? So the book has two parts. And the first part of the book, the first half of the book, is written for any parent who has questions about speech and language development. So even though the title of the book is Speech and Language Disorders, it's really about speech and language development, brain development, terminology, what speech pathologists look at when they do an evaluation, how they think about treatment and set it up, practical strategies for facilitating any child's language, whether they're just normally moving along or whether there's already been a problem identified. So that's sort of the first half of the book. And there's more than one of those out on the market. But the second half of the book, I think, is what sets my book apart. I wrote it as a love letter to parents who've been on a journey of having a child who has any kind of special need. So it could be communication, but it's not only communication, because what I have seen in 25 years of practice is that parents all go through the same arc. They go through the same grieving process. They go through the same questioning process. They go through the same evolutionary process. It changes them as a person. It changes them as a parent. And oftentimes, so many times, they ask the same questions. They have the same fears. They have the same worries and concerns about what's going to happen to my child. Are they going to make friends? Are they going to get over this? Are they going to move past it? Or is this going to be with us forever? Are we ever going to be able to stop going to therapy all the time? What about the financial concerns, the marital changes, siblings? Like, there's just so much. So the second half of the book is written to honor and to witness that process for parents. And it has chapters about how to organize all your stuff related, paper related to your child and their therapies. It has information about the kinds of skills that you need to think about developing for yourself, how to be a good advocate, how to be right there running the therapy team, not taking a back seat, and all the things that parents have taught me watching them go through the process over all these years. So that piece is not something that anyone else has written about as a speech path.
Oh, it's beautiful, Suzanne.
Thank you.
And I know so many parents who would get so much out of that. And as you said, it's not just speech, it's all things. And I'm sure you find that speech becomes almost a part of almost all of them. Is that accurate? There's a component there?
Well, I mean, I think that obviously I work primarily with kids who have issues with communication, either, like we were saying, some sort of speech problem, a feeding problem, a language problem, behavior issues, whether it's, you know, being born premature, having cerebral palsy, having autism, you know, it puts tentacles into every aspect of life. And so I really just wanted to honor that, because I feel like when parents learn how to honor their own feelings, and when they learn they learn some simple tools and strategies to help manage their own experience, then they can divert their energy differently into their parenting.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about that. Expand on that a little.
Clarify for me what you want more.
So you were saying, as a parent, if they kind of reorganize their own energy a little bit more. So what would that look like?
Well, I think you could pull the lens back a little bit and think about any sort of traumatic isn't the right word, but unexpected experience that you have. A significant illness, a loss, a major life change, job, something like that. We all go through that process of sort of figuring out, okay, now I'm in this, because nobody expects to have a child who has a developmental issue. Nobody expects that. No parent wants that or anticipates that or thinks about that. And so oftentimes they find themselves, I see parents initially feeling really unequal to that task. Like, I can't, it's overwhelming. I'm exhausted. I don't have any bandwidth for my other kids, my marriage, my job. I'm taking more time off than I thought I would, because there's a medical problem or there's all these therapy appointments, whatever. And oftentimes too, parents are not taught to be savvy, or they're not encouraged to be savvy partners to the physician, the therapist. And I see these fierce, wonderful mamas who get small when they walk in the pediatrician's office, and I hate that. So my job is to give them information, support, and empower them so that they are right in there with all that fierceness. I feel like sometimes they leave that behind when they walk into a situation where they feel like there's that power differential, and there isn't, because nobody knows your child better than you. And even the best physicians don't have the same breadth of information and depth of understanding of your child and how your child is functioning in real life situations than you do. So I want every mom to feel like they are just as knowledgeable, just as powerful, just as important as any physician or therapist that they are working with, including me. Like, even if that means pushing back against something that I'm saying, because they're the ones who are shepherding their kids through this experience. So, it really is so important to me to see moms develop those skills and practice and flex those muscles so that they just become seamless. That mamatude, that fierceness just follows them through everything.
I like that mamatude.
Yeah.
I'm going to use that. That's great. Oh, yeah. It's beautiful. And it's so inspiring, and something that, like I said, I think there's so many people, it doesn't matter what their particular child is dealing with, being reminded that they are the experts. That's powerful, and it's beautiful that it's something that's become such a huge passion of yours to share. Because you've been in this industry for 25 years. You've seen it all.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of change. I've seen a lot of change in the kinds of kids who come in for services. I've seen a lot of change in parenting, and sort of expectations of parenting. And I've seen such an increase in the pressure on parents, but moms in particular, to do it right. And I recently wrote an article about what I call the art of intuitive parenting. And that ability to sort of check in with yourself to see if what you're being told really resonates for you and your values. And I actually shared this story with Paula because it was illustrative of what we were talking about at the time. We were talking about the change in parenting and how oftentimes today it's much more permissive and there's less limit setting and there's this taboo on using the word no and on having structure and limitations and boundaries and all of that. And I was working with a mom who had a young kiddo, toddler, like I don't remember exactly, but he was somewhere between 12 and 18 months, which is a challenging, there's lots going on for toddlers at that time. And she said to me, what do you think about using the word no, with my child? And I asked her what she meant. And she said that a lot of the mom blogs that are out right now really, not just caution against, but sort of rail against the idea of using the word no and putting any sort of boundaries on. And I think I initially sort of laughed out loud, and then I was like, okay, rein it in. And I asked her, what do you think about that? And she said, I think it's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. It didn't resonate for her. It didn't feel right. It didn't sit well with her intuitive sense of what was right for her child. But there was all this pressure because that's the message that's circulating out there all the time. And so we talked about how to be constructive in her parenting, how to be loving in her parenting. You don't have to be, a dictator in order to provide really loving boundaries. And so that was such a great exercise for me in walking her through that process of being intuitive about it and having her ask herself. I keep pointing to my solar plexus because I want moms to take that same intuitive thing that they do with so many things in their own life and put it into their parenting and realize that all the noise that's out there about what's right and what's popular has shifted and will shift again. It's about what's right for you and your family with your values, your child. And you can't always use the same strategy with even two kids in the same family, because when they're different, you have to be different. So I want moms to feel okay with taking what works for them from all of that outside input and putting away the rest of it and not feeling guilty about it and not feeling like they're less than if they're not doing what a mom blog says. Not that there isn't value in looking around and surveying for input and ideas, but I really just want moms to feel so good about what they're doing, whatever it is, and it's what's working and what's not working for you.
Well, as a mom, I appreciate what you said so much. And it's funny, I was at the beach this morning and a woman just started chatting with me. She was probably, in her 70s. She said she just turned 71. She looked great. And she was saying how she's like, I give moms today a lot of credit. My daughter, has kids of her own, and it's so much more pressure on the mom. So just this morning I had this conversation, and I think there's actually been a bit of a backlash to the backlash now. And more of us are saying, no, I say no. My kids hear my mama bear voice. They know when there's a boundary, and sometimes it has to be stated very firmly and other times it's not so firm. But thank you for that, because every single mother watching right now is going, oh, thank you. Well, thank you.
Yeah, if you'll permit me to say just one more thing about that. For me personally, here in my space, when kids come to see me, they follow my rules. They do things the way that I do them. And they're okay with boundaries and structure. It's flexible. I had a little guy yesterday who got a little mad at me at the end of the session, and he was sort of bent over in half, and mom was like, time to say goodbye. And he stayed bent in half and said, bye, Sue. And so I bent over and was like, nose to nose. And I was like, okay, bye. I mean, I could force him to stand up and, you know, look me in the eye, or I could just meet him where he was in that moment, recognizing that something didn't go the way that he wanted it to go, and that's okay. He can learn to move through that. But I can also, I can tip over and say like, bye, and just let that be a light moment. Versus if he was throwing things in my room, that's not an acceptable behavior. And then we pull ranks around that and we help support him through that. So to me, it's about the ebb and flow of looking at the situation, looking at the moment, and knowing what you know about your child to say, like, it's okay for me to say no and make this a teachable moment about how we do things in this family. What's acceptable behavior, what's not acceptable behavior. We can think about that in terms of timing and how we language it. We can be supportive and loving without being punishing, but still communicate the things we need to communicate, because isn't the primary role of parenting to socialize your child to be in the larger world, in the wider world, where not everything is always going to go according to their plan.
Mm-hmm.
And Paula and I actually had this conversation too about building resilience.
That was on the tip of my tongue. I was just about to say that.
Cognitive resilience and neurological resilience, which says you can recover, literally your nervous system can recover from unexpected events and not having your way, and you actually become more emotionally savvy by having those experiences. So shielding from and preventing any sort of negative emotion doesn't really help in the long run. It might seem like you're doing this wonderful thing because you're creating this beautiful bubble, but that bubble doesn't exist out in the preschool, on the playground, in gymnastics class, whatever. We need to have a range of skills, and then the awareness to know, okay, I'm at home, so I have these behaviors that are okay. I'm out in public, so these behaviors are okay. That's just part of developing. And somehow I think it's gotten lost a little bit. And so if I can be a focused voice in the noise that says it's okay to think for yourself about what feels best for me, and then how do I implement that? Maybe you need some support from a speech path or a counselor or a play therapist or an OT or whoever to help kind of bring that into specific relief. But it comes from you as the mom to figure out what do I want this to look like, and then how do I do that?
It's an honor to be here and to hear these things, because again, I think as a mom myself, there aren't quite enough voices being that, for us. So thank you for being that. Thank you for standing up for what you believe in. Thank you for doing what you love and being one more person out there who is spreading their light. It's an honor.
Thank you.
And I'm sure a lot of people watching feel the same way. And so what would you say to someone who is looking into, who's maybe their child is experiencing a couple of these things? Would you have them, give you a call, send you an email, or how would they get in touch with you or get to know your style a little bit better?
Yeah. So couple of things. I mean, of course, a parent can obviously email me or call me directly. I do offer free screenings, which is like a half an hour to 40 minutes where we come together and take a look. It's at no cost to you, but we can sort of take a look at what's going on with your child. What are your concerns? What are your questions? And it helps us to identify, is there something going on here that needs to be evaluated or looked at in more depth? Or do you just need some strategies and pointers and you kind of go on your way? And one of the things that Paula and I have talked about for the fall is for me to come down to the school and do that for any parent who wants me to take a look at that.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. I mean, that's something I've done for a really long time is screenings. I've done them in preschools and daycares and here at my office. It's a great way for parents to sort of get a feel for who I am and how I connect with kids, and for kids to kind of have a chance to play. It's a lot less structured than a formal evaluation where there's more expectations for performance. A screening is much more open-ended and gives me a chance to just put my ears and eyes on things and see, I really think there's something going on here. But honestly, aside from the screenings, I mean, I get questions from parents all the time. I get them through the book website. I get them, through Facebook, or, people find my pages, or, my emails. And I've often had conversations with parents who didn't turn into a client, but they just needed some guidance about where to go. And I should say too, that a big piece of what's happening in my practice is, yes, of course, I provide speech pathology services to kids who have a diagnosed disorder, or, whatever, but there's so much more that is wanting to happen in terms of working more directly with parents, with coaching parents, and working with kids who don't have a disorder, but just need some help. So, with those early communication skills. So it doesn't, working with a speech pathologist, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a huge problem or dysfunction. It could just mean that you need a little support to kind of push you in the right direction.
Perfect. Well, that's great. And I'm sure that if anyone needs, to learn more about you, they can look you up. And your last name is Ducharme.
Ducharme. Yep.
So you'll see that when it's posted. But thank you so much, Suzanne. This has been such an honor, such a pleasure. And I hope that, you continue to do this work that you love to do, and that I continue to, come cross paths with you and cheer you on.
I think Paula and I are going to cook up a few things in the fall to do some workshops and things specific for parents related to the work that I do, perhaps doing the screening. So I'm hoping to really develop that particular relationship and have the opportunity to work with not only parents who have kids with a disorder, but kids, who are in that early language stage and can benefit from some of my knowledge and expertise.
Yeah, there are so many parents out there who would benefit from working with you. So
excellent.
Thank you so much for your time.
Sure. Thank you for having this great conversation with me.
Great. Take care, Suzanne.
You too.